Welcome back to the show, Week 11, big week of news, which I'm hoping is going to transition naturally into a big week of awesome videos on this show. Lots of stuff that we got to get to. It's not quite as serious, not as much of a downer as last week when, unfortunately, things were going up in flames around the world. But there is some unfortunate news, some hopeful news, and some interesting news. Updates on how the drug war is playing out. Light bulbs going to make a big appearance on the show this week. But we're going to be starting off in Texas. Texas has passed their sweeping, in my view, draconian limitations on abortion rights in Texas. Now, this follows weeks of protest, the epic filibuster of Wendy Davis, attempts to stop this from being passed until Texas, the legislature goes into recess. But unfortunately, that did not happen. And as we suspected after Wendy Davis's filibuster, the special session of the Texas legislature was able to get these passed. Now, in case you haven't been following this very closely, here are some details on what these limitations would do. House Bill 2 would require doctors to have admitting privileges at nearby hospitals, allow abortions only in surgical centers, limit where and when women may take abortion-inducing pills, and ban abortions after 20 weeks. Only 5 out of 42 existing abortion clinics meet the requirements to be a surgical center, and clinic owners say they can't afford to upgrade or relocate. Now, of course, the people pushing for this bill in Texas and similar bills in other states, including North Carolina, Ohio, I believe Iowa, a couple of other states right now, they're saying that this is about safety and they want to make sure that the women are safe. So, of course, they have to be at a place that can perform surgeries. Although, of course, as the opposition points out, giving birth is more dangerous than taking these abortion-inducing pills and things like that, and yet they don't require those sorts of same surgical procedure. I guess the ability of the place to perform those surgeries as they do in the case of these abortion procedures. And so, of course, we understand what's really going on. They just want to limit it. They figured out if we make this happen, we're going to cut down 90% of the abortion clinics in Texas. And so after this, when Rick Perry inevitably signs it, which should happen very soon, if he doesn't gallivant off to Israel, which we'll get to, it's going to be much harder in Texas to get an abortion. Now, you will still legally be able to, just not after 20 weeks, and you might have to drive 3, 5, 10 hours across the state, depending on where you live. Because as we said, many of these clinics that do already exist are going to have to shut down. So those are the details. There's a couple of implications of this that I want to talk about. One, sort of possibly the silver lining around this, many people are saying that this might be the issue that will finally flip Texas. Now, it might not happen tomorrow or next year, but that Texas, the Republicans have simply overreached in assuming that, look, these women in our state aren't going to fight back. You know, many of them believe our bullshit, you know, the Republican women in Texas, and we can just manhandle them. We can do whatever we want, just like in states around the country. But the problem is that this isn't Mississippi. This isn't even North Carolina in a lot of ways. Like, Texas is not as deep red as they might want to believe that it is. And every year that becomes even more true. And so hopefully women will fight back against this. I mean, we've seen huge protests and a lot of interest from around the country on this issue. So hopefully that will be a silver lining. And the second point that I want to say about this is something I was talking with Lucas earlier, is why all of a sudden are we seeing so many anti-abortion bills brought up? And I think that it's basically because we're in sort of the doldrums between the last presidential election. We're going to be gearing up for the midterm elections in something like 6 months, and people want time off. Not the Republican legislators, just regular people. And so I think the reason that these bills are being pushed for is they're hoping that people aren't paying attention. I don't think that was the case here. I mean, the fact that they had a live stream of the Texas legislature's debate over the bill and 130,000 simultaneous logins, I think that showed that people do care. But I think that that's why they're doing it. And I'm hoping that in the long run, these sorts of bills get shut down. And the ones that do get passed now, in 5 years, 10 years, when the country inevitably moves in a more progressive direction on this, and the people who are so fervently anti-choice now begin to die out, we can start to roll back some of this legislation. But to do that, there are going to have to be some changes, because for whatever reason, the way it shakes down right now, the women that are against abortion simply seem to care more or vote more based on the issue than the women who want to protect abortion rights. And that is even stronger the case, or even more the case when it comes to the men. I believe that there are a lot of men that are pro-choice, but they don't seem to vote based on it, whereas the Republican men who are pro-life will organize their entire careers, their entire political lives around it. And that needs to change if we're going to have some of these laws rolled back. So Bad day in Texas, unfortunate day for Texas women, but let this light a fire under your ass to get rid of Rick Perry, to get rid of these Republican legislators, so that the next time the Texas legislature meets in 5 years or so, or whatever, we can roll these back and get some reasonable, rational, pro-choice legislation in Texas. Now moving to the east, all the way to Russia, a little update on Edward Snowden. So the last we heard, Edward Snowden was still in an airport in Moscow. Now he has been granted asylum by Venezuela, Bolivia, and Nicaragua, but the problem remains, how do you get there? And so he put out a statement which was released by WikiLeaks. Feel free to Google that. It's quite long, but it's awesome, and he makes some great points in it. And one of the points that he made was that he needs temporary asylum in Russia so that he can arrange for the proper documents to travel to Latin America. Breaking news. He has that asylum. He has taken the offer from Vladimir Putin now. There are some interesting little caveats to that offer, and that's why we're covering the story here. Now, Putin said that if you are going to have asylum granted to you by Russia, one of the requirements for that is that you stop leaking these materials, specifically that you stop leaking materials that will harm the U.S. Thank you, Putin, for caring so much about us. I think that he's more worried about similar leakers, similar whistleblowers in Russia, less about, the average American. I don't think he cares so much about that. And so he took the deal. Snowden has asylum in Russia. And so it seems like he's going to have to abide by what Putin wanted, no more leaks. And so the question is, are we done with having information revealed about PRISM, about these different wiretapping and data mining programs? Not necessarily. And that's the good side of this story. Supposedly, if you believe the different sources that are discussing this, Snowden has already passed on all of the information that he intended to leak to various journalists, to various newspapers, and things like that. And bear in mind that it hasn't been Snowden directly that's been leaking this information that we have gotten over the past few months. It's been the different journalists, the different outlets that he's already given the information to. And so Snowden, by the way, had a quote, "My job is done," that he provided it to journalists who will then disseminate the information. So there's every reason to believe that Glenn Greenwald and other journalists and other outlets still can reveal interesting, substantive information about the wiretapping and the other violations of our privacy that the U.S. government is engaged in. And so simply because Edward Snowden now has asylum in Russia does not mean that we've heard the last from what he discovered in his time in the NSA. And so I think that this is really sort of a win-win. Edward Snowden, he did his job. He got that information out. Hopefully the American public will act on it. Now he doesn't have to worry as much about what's going to happen to him in the next month or two. Now let's turn back stateside. Interesting story about gridlock. Sorry, I'm trying to preemptively maintain my voice because for whatever reason, when I'm discussing these stories by myself, I blow through my voice in no time flat. You won't be surprised to find out that there is gridlock in Washington. Nothing's really getting done, at least nothing good. And so every once in a while, we like to look in with the American public and find out who do you blame for the gridlock that's going on right now. And so we have some very interesting polling data. Let's see, where's this coming from? Oh, this is a Quinnipiac poll. And so there's 4 interesting statements that we're gonna talk about here. So when asked, 51% blame Republicans for being determined to block Obama. Very astute of you, American public. While 35% said the president lacks the skills to persuade congressional leaders to work together. So that's interesting. 51% blaming the Republicans is really about as high as you can expect the American public to go, since obviously most Republicans are not going to blame the Republicans, because even if they think that it's gridlock, even if they think the Republicans are responsible, they think that's a good thing. And so they're hardly going to assign blame to the Republicans there. And 35% saying the president lacks the skills. Some percentage of the people responding to this poll simply hate Obama. They think that he's a Kenyan Marxist. And so they're gonna check every one of the negative Obama statements. And so I'm not too worried about that. Moving on to 2 other interesting responses. 53% say that Obama was doing too little to compromise with members of Congress. Before we go on to the last one, I want to address that. That is freaking ridiculous. The problem here is that the little bit of legislation that we actually do have passed by this Congress is because Obama, and also, to be fair, the Democrats in the Senate have done too much to compromise. I mean, look at this immigration bill. It's a clusterfuck. It's basically just a border security bill with, hopefully, if the House allows it, some pathway to citizenship in the next 250 years. The student loan interest rate bill. Now, I don't know how much direct control Obama had over the Senate negotiations there, but basically the reason that we didn't, before July 1st, have a deal was because the rates were going to double to 6.8, and the Republicans weren't doing enough to deal with that. So instead, we have this variable interest rate that, yeah, now looks pretty good, but basically we've just said, yeah, we'll get to that 6.8%. It just may take 10 years, while also, by the way, doing nothing to deal with the rising cost of tuition. But finally, 68% say Republican leaders were doing too little to compromise with the president. Again, when you look at the numbers and you understand that a certain percentage of the people taking this poll are Republicans, and they're not going to say no to that, 68% means basically unanimous response on that issue. And I think that that's the number one point here. I think that, first of all, the Republicans did very little to hide, what their plan was when Obama was elected. Mitch McConnell said, we don't want him to have a second term. We want him to fail. That's what Rush Limbaugh said. And the Republicans seem to agree. And they're not going to give him anything, basically, unless, like with the immigration bill and like with the student loan rate bill, it's basically what they wanted to begin with. We can get those passed, so hurrah. I like that the American public seems to understand what's going on, considering that many don't watch the news at all, and even when they watch the news, it's just about Casey Anthony and George Zimmerman. I suppose it's good that they have some understanding of what's going on. But I want to put a bottom line on this one. Whether you think the Republicans are to blame, or whether you think Obama isn't doing enough to negotiate or to compromise with the Republicans, the bottom line here is that very little is going to get done. I mean, we're in the small period between the presidential election and the midterm elections, and nothing is really being passed. Nothing that the Democrats who got this Democratic Senate and Democratic president into office, the Democrats in the country who voted more for Democratic congressional candidates than Republicans got, nothing that they want is going to be passed, because in a very short time, the midterm elections are going to be coming. There's a very real chance that the Democrats might lose the Senate. Almost no chance whatsoever that they'll take over the Congress. So they're going to want to be very careful to minimize the chance of losing the Senate. And look, honestly, whether they retain the Senate, or especially if they don't, the idea that more will be done in the remaining 2 years of Obama's term, that's a fairy tale. That's a fantasy. It's not going to happen. So good on the American public for understanding at least somewhat what's going on, the interplay between the Republicans and Obama. But I do worry for the next few years. Okay, let's turn to Sarah Palin. News broke in the last week that Sarah Palin is looking to triumphantly return to political service, political life, political office. She might run for Senate in Alaska. And now, as you know, this is American politics. There's going to be polls every couple of days. Those polls are coming in, and we have some information about how Sarah would do and whether or not she should even run in the first place. So first, should she run? We have this question, should Sarah Palin hold some public office? Now, they're not saying specifically the Senate seat here, but some public office. 35% say yes, so about 1 out of 3. I mean, if you were to just look at the American public in general, about 1 out of 3 are absolutely in love with Sarah Palin, either because they agree with her or because they want to boink her. 15% say that they don't care. Not surprised there. With 49% saying no, she should not hold any public office in the future. 49%, and an additional 15% who don't care. Now, look, if you're trying to reestablish yourself as a political figure, those are not good numbers. I mean, Anthony Weiner, Eliot Spitzer, I'm sure they have better numbers than that, and they had their own little picadillos. And so that's whether or not she should hold any office. Now, the question of what if she were to run for Senate, she would be going against the current the senator, Mark Begich, the Democrat who's currently holding the seat in Alaska. In the polls today, 54% Begich, 38% Palin. Now, look, no ads have been run. The debates haven't happened. We totally understand that, but this is not the usual situation of trying to poll a Senate race 2 years out or whatever. It's not like Sarah Palin is a nobody. It's not like she's just, the Wasilla mayor or something like that. Everybody knows who Sarah Palin is. Everybody has fairly well-developed opinions of Sarah Palin, similar to when we talk about Hillary Clinton running. And so 54-38 for her home state, those are not good numbers. Now, I do want to say Sarah Palin was on the Sean Hannity show. This is where this news originally broke. Here's a quote from her. I'm still waiting to see, what the lineup will be, and hoping that there will be some new blood, new energy, not just kind of picking from the same old politicians in the state. This is how she announced it. Like, I'm going to be real. This is my bottom line on this story, by the way. I don't even think she wants to run. I don't think she's going to run. And especially after seeing these numbers, it's less likely, I would think. I think Sarah Palin desperately wants to be relevant. She wants to be talked about. And look, she got on this show, by announcing that she might run for Senate. But look, if you're Sarah Palin and you've had the last few years after you fled, the governorship of Alaska, basically in disgrace after only doing a couple years of work, after failing to become vice president 2 elections ago, she still gets book deals, she still gets, reality shows, she still gets speaking tours. Why the hell would you want to actually go through the grueling process of running for office again? And God forbid she were to win and actually have to do the work of being a U.S. senator, mainly asking people for money. Why would she want to do this? She's living the easy life right now. All she needs to do is go on the Sean Hannity show, say, I might run someday for some office. She gets another cycle through of the news of being discussed. Maybe she sells a few more books or something like that. I think that that's what she actually wants. And one of the reasons I'm discussing this is because that's kind of what I want. Because as uninterested as I am at her selling more books and more speaking tours, I am much less interested in her actually holding public office. And so I think that this is the best of both worlds. This is a win for her. It's a win for me personally. Huzzah. Another politician, another conservative nutbag politician hoping to run for another office. Let's turn to Rick Perry. Texas Governor Rick Perry, fresh off of his victory, I suppose, in passing draconian abortion limitations in Texas, is looking to higher office again. And how do we know that? Because in October of this year, he's going to be traveling to Israel. Now, it's hilarious that traveling to Israel means that you're running for president, but that's actually what it means in this country, and so that's what we're going to be talking about today. A quote from Perry in the Washington Times. He was interviewed. "We will be going to Israel to bring together Arabs, Christians, and Jews in an educated forum." No, you won't. You won't. Nobody going to Israel right now is going to have any real chance of doing that, least of all Rick Perry, who, by the way, when he gets to Israel, I can't wait for the gaffes and the goofy statements and the ways that he offends Christians, Jews, and Arabs once he gets there. I'm already looking forward to the sidebars. It's going to be nothing but fun. But as we said in the intro, many people believe that this is a prelude to running once again for president, as he did in the last cycle. In regard to that, he says, "Any future considerations I will announce in due time, and I will arrive at that decision appropriately, but my focus will remain on Texas." Again, no it won't. He already announced he's not going to be running for governor again. And look, if you know anything about Texas state politics, the governor does very little, very rarely anyway. I don't know what he does in his spare time. I guess shoot coyotes while he's running. But he's not going to be paying attention to Texas. And look, he can deny that he wants to run for president again, but we understand that that's why he's going. One little note I want to make, buried at the bottom of this is from The Hill, by the way, this article. It says, in addition to establishing foreign policy bona fides, a trip to Israel, blah, 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 blah. Establishing foreign policy bona fides, traveling to Israel is establishing that you know anything, that you know jack shit about foreign policy? That's bullshit. First of all, I took a trip to Israel. I guess I'm qualified to run for president now. Simply going to Israel, walking to the Wailing Wall, walking along the path in Old Jerusalem where Jesus supposedly went, that does not mean that you're qualified to run for president. And we've already seen more than enough out of Rick Perry to know that he certainly is not. But he is going to go to Israel. He's going to run again. He's going to lose because he's a lightweight. He can't stand up to the other Republicans who'll be running for the nomination that, while just as stupid on one level, are better at hiding their stupidity. So have a good time in Israel. Tel Aviv is beautiful, but you're not going to be then taking a later trip to D.C. And by the way, I want to say, maybe by the time this video goes up, it'll be done. I'm working on a little Rick Perry takedown video right now. That is going to be fun. It's taking a long time. I don't know when it'll be done, but Rick Perry got on my nerves during this whole abortion debate in Texas, and so I can't wait to stick it to him in video form. So that's going to happen. Before we take a break, one last story. I want to get it out of the way before the break. I have to talk about it because I've been paying attention to it the last few days. In the George Zimmerman trial, the prosecution has rested, the defense has rested. The prosecution and the defense have both had their closing statements, and we are now waiting for the jury to render some sort of verdict or possibly need more information. So that's ongoing. Hopefully this video will be posted before they render a verdict. But before they do, I'm going to be making my prediction. I'm going to talk about a few of the last developments in the case that personally pissed me off, and I'm going to talk about the reaction to the last video I did. So first of all, a couple of the things that bothered me. There was a statement by O'Mara, he's the defense attorney for George Zimmerman. At one point, he said, he's not guilty of anything but protecting his own life. Now we're gonna rotate back around to that statement later on, but I love the idea that he's not guilty of anything. Not just that it's not second-degree murder, but that there should be no penalty whatsoever for what went on that night. I love that. So we're gonna get back to that. But first, one little stunt that the defense attorney pulled during his closing statements. I'm going to read this in full. So, O'Mara also asked jurors to ponder what Martin was doing during the 4 minutes from when he started running at the urging of a friend he was talking to on a cell phone to when he encountered the neighborhood watch volunteer. Martin was planning his attack instead of going back to the house where he was staying, said O'Mara, who let 4 minutes of silence elapse in court to dramatize the amount of time. I don't know exactly what Martin was doing during that time. Maybe he was trying to walk home. Maybe he was hiding. Maybe he was talking on the cell phone, something like that. I don't entirely know. But the idea that Martin saw that he was being followed, and so he spent 4 minutes laying in ambush for George Zimmerman, or planning what sequence of moves he was going to use when he turned on this guy who was following him. I know some of you watching this video are going to be totally pulled in by that. That's brilliant. That makes total sense. But the only reason that you're saying that is because you already wanted Trayvon Martin to die and you want George Zimmerman to walk free, and you'll accept any argument that will lead to that. That's my honest opinion. The idea that Trayvon Martin was looking to attack, looking to kill George Zimmerman is freaking insane. And that is what's driving me crazy about this case. There is no evidence whatsoever has been provided that would lead a rational person to believe that Trayvon Martin was going to or interested in engaging in any illegal behavior whatsoever. He walked to a store, he was walking home. That's what we know about what he was doing. Now look, at some point did he decide that he needed to attack Zimmerman because he believed that Zimmerman was following him and would attack him? Perhaps. I'm not eliminating that as a possibility. But that does not mean that he was looking to kill Zimmerman or that he spent 4 minutes laying in ambush. And so that little stunt by O'Mara, I think, is the most ridiculous. I also hate that they were allowed to play that CGI recreation of what happened, where it shows Martin just attacking first. We don't know that that's what happened. And so simply putting it in CGI form, I think, is incredibly irresponsible. I like that the judge did not allow them to use that earlier on in the case, but they can use it at the end, so I don't understand how that exactly comports. But anyway, so I do want to talk about my prediction. I'm predicting this partially because of the evidence that has been presented, but partially also because of my, I believe, understanding of what the jury is probably thinking at this point. The idea that Zimmerman would walk with absolutely no penalty whatsoever, I simply can't believe that the jury will allow that to happen. But I also believe that the prosecution's attempt to levy a charge of second-degree murder is incredibly hard in this case, where Trayvon Martin is not here to testify, and no good witnesses. The fact that they are saying they can't tell who was screaming on the phone, whatever. Maybe you can't prove that. But I do believe that manslaughter will be the charge that he is guilty of. I believe that the jury will return that. And the reason is that I think that for all that the defense's case seems to be trying to demonize this young child and trying to make it seem as if he's super scary and just put yourself in that position, I think that they understand that this would set an awful precedent for what self-defense means in the future, how stand-your-ground laws are going to be adjudicated in the future. And so I mentioned point of view there, and I want to turn to that as one of my final points here. For the people who are on George Zimmerman's side in this and saying that, look, he did nothing wrong whatsoever, I want you to put yourself in the point of view, not of George Zimmerman, because I believe that that's what you've been doing. And maybe you've seen, thugs walk around your neighborhood and they piss you off, and you think about, why should I have to let them get away with crimes and things like that? I think that you've been doing a good job of putting yourselves into the shoes of Zimmerman, according to what he's said. But I want you to put yourself into the point of view of Trayvon Martin, or someone in a similar situation as Trayvon Martin. If George Zimmerman gets away with this, if he gets off without any time in jail whatsoever, think about what that actually means for the future of self-defense in America. That you could be walking across your neighborhood, or the neighborhood of where your father lives, or any neighborhood. Somebody can begin to follow you. They can be in a car, they can talk to the police can say, or the police dispatcher can say, stop following him. If at any time, no matter what goes on, you turn and defend yourself in any way, they can now shoot and kill you. If you defend yourself in any fashion, if you punch him, if you try to run away perhaps, if you scream, if you push him, if you knock him to the ground, whether he fights back or not, he can pull out a gun and he can shoot you. Because that's what self-defense means. It doesn't mean that you were attacked and you defended yourself. It means that you're free to do whatever it takes to put yourself in a position where they use any force whatsoever, and now murder is legal. Now, you are not only in the future possibly going to be in the shoes of George Zimmerman, especially if you go to Florida, and especially if he's let off, you might be on the other side of this confrontation. And I want you to think about that. I know that it's not going to sway you. You want to see him get off. You're sick of these thugs getting away with whatever it is that Trayvon Martin is getting away with, buying Skittles. But I want you to put yourself in that position. If somebody was following you, and you're the big, brave man that you are, and you want to defend yourself, you can be shot, and you can be killed, and it's 100% legal. That's the America we will be living in if George Zimmerman does not spend any time in jail. Look forward to that. Now, the news after the break is going to be a little bit lighter, a little bit less about murder. I'm going to take a short break, I'm going to rest my voice, drink a little tea, and we'll be back with those remaining stories. Back on the show, in this second half of the show, we've got some fun stuff for you. We've got Secession. We've got an example of the pen indeed being mightier than the sword. We've got an epic light bulb war. What's that all about? And finally, the Taliban bans something in part of Pakistan. What is it? You're going to have to stick around to find out. Or skip ahead in the video, but please don't do that. I want you to watch all these. So first, turning to Colorado. Parts of Colorado and the surrounding states are looking to secede from their states and form the 51st state in the United States. We're going to find out why they're doing that. But I love that, there's that old saying, these colors don't run. Apparently you have to amend that to, these colors don't run unless you require us to produce more renewable energy. That's not as catchy, it's not going to fit on a bumper sticker, but it's more appropriate in this case. And so as I alluded to, there are several reasons why they want to secede to form their 51st perfect libertarian Ayn Randian state. But one of the main reasons is this requirement that was signed into law in Colorado recently that would require rural energy cooperatives to get 20% of their energy from renewable sources by 2020. Now that might not actually even happen anyway. The current goal is 10%, but it's a possibility. And there's also some other reasons that they want to secede. So the organizers for this movement cite several failed bills to regulate the oil and gas industry that might have increased fines for violation of state law. So it's already against the law. This would just increase the fines. And they're saying, look, we're obviously going to break these laws, and so we don't want to pay those bigger fines. And so perhaps that's financially responsible of them. Also, let's see, there was another measure to address the fast increasing number of both wells and oil spills and contaminations in Colorado. Now, I haven't heard enough about that. I think that's partly the problem of the mainstream media, the fact that these environmental damage, like these stories, the spills and things like that aren't being covered enough. But, blonde girls get kidnapped, and so you only have so much time on air. But anyway, they also cite a couple of things like gun regulations and things like that. I think Colorado actually did have some substantive gun regulation after Sandy Hook. I believe clip size, but I could be wrong there. Don't cite me. But anyway, so those are some of the reasons they want to secede. Now, as I said, it's Colorado, but also some of the areas of Kansas and Nebraska that bordering are considering 3 states become one. It's kind of like the Megazord or something like that. Now, of course, if they wanted to do this, it's not exactly very simple. It's not like just signing an online petition or something. The U.S. Constitution requires that secession of parts of any existing state be approved both by the voters and the legislature of that state. And that becomes a little bit complicated, especially when, if it involves parts of 3 states, you have to get the voters of 3 states and the legislatures of 3 states to approve it. And that's probably not going to happen. And this would not be an insubstantial state, by the way, or insignificant. One of the 10 counties that initiated the movement, Weld County, is larger than Delaware and Rhode Island. So this would not be the smallest state if it did happen. But look, especially because there's energy in these areas, Kansas, Colorado, Nebraska are not going to just let them walk away. That's not how it works. And anyway, so we understand that's not going to happen. They met just this last week to draw up borders, but I couldn't find those. They're a bunch of chuckleheads. Some people that attended the meeting are saying that like they're already cooling off and saying, oh wait, this is freaking insane. This isn't going to happen. While others say that they're still committed to it. To put it into perspective, you might not be surprised to find out that secession doesn't exactly happen every day. Last time it happened was 1863, West Virginia. That worked out really well for them. No offense, West Virginia. But anyway, so it's not going to happen. And what I love is that, like, they talk about like liberals being like, you're cowards. You just run away from conflict. But like, because some laws are being passed that might fine you for breaking laws and spilling oil all over the place, we're going to form our own state where we can have guns and oil spills. And how fucking awful would that state be? Where, like, the main impetus for creating it is we don't want to be regulated in how we throw oil all over the place. And we just want to have everybody toting around guns. It's just going to be on fire and shot up inside of the first few years. Who would want to live there? But anyway, don't worry. As I said, probably not going to happen in the first place. Moving on. Because we don't exactly have the most responsible media, very often bills will include things that we never find out about, contradictory language that we only find out about once it's actually passed, like recently when Florida sponsored a bill or passed a bill that banned computers across the entire state. But finally, we have somebody watching out for these sorts of things, and I'm talking here about Representative Mark Takano of California. He's a previous high school English teacher who took out his mighty red pen and began marking up a letter from the GOP. And so there's a couple of things here I want to talk about. The first, I love that they have their little like thesis statement or whatever, and then later on, the bill tries to address every issue. Like it contradicts exactly what they're saying, and he points that out. And that's sort of the problem with the media too, is that there's this hypocrisy that it just infests the bills and the speeches, and it's so rarely pointed out. And that's why people are so in love with The Daily Show and with The Colbert Report, because they actually point out this hypocrisy just by rolling the tape or going from page 1 of a bill to page 20 of a bill or a letter or whatever. And so I'm glad that he's actually doing that. The second point, in the follow-up questions, the assignment was to address what should have been done about the 11 million people already here. Did you purposefully leave this out? I love the snarky nature of that. But also, yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing while hearing about the entire progress of this immigration bill, that it turned out that basically all we're doing is funding more border agents and building a bigger fence along more of the border. That's not the problem with immigration right now. That's not the reason we need immigration reform. Now, yes, it's possible that if the House gets some sort of sense back to itself, that we might have a pathway to citizenship that will take fucking decades, if you even qualify for it. But yeah, I love that he pointed that out, because very often these bills don't accomplish what they say they're going to. I mean, we have the student loan interest rate bill, that doesn't really do anything to control the cost of college, or even the interest rate, since it makes it variable, the Senate's bargain, the version they passed. It's going to end up being that high in the future anyway when interest rates go up. Also, you had in North Carolina this motorcycle safety legislation that ends up banning abortions and things like that. Like, they purposefully put those things in these bills, but I like that somebody has the pen to point it out. And finally, he concludes with weak draft redo, include evidence, remove tawdry allegations. And look, he's just trying to end on a high note with even more snark, but yeah, include some evidence. Very often, like in their speeches and in their written statements, they're allowed to just say stuff without proving it. Like, in Texas right now, we have the draconian anti-abortion legislation. Like, oh, this is about protecting women. Is it? why don't you show how this would actually protect women? And obviously people on the other side would say that it actually leads to more risky, more dangerous, illegal abortion procedures. But anyway, Mark Takano, kudos. I appreciated English class. Didn't exactly like having red pen all over my papers, but I can appreciate someone taking the Republicans to task for the ridiculous things that they write. Moving on. Oh, God. Oh, God. We're in the middle of a light bulb war. It's been going on for a few years. Now it's been a bit underground. It's sort of a rebel movement that's going on. It doesn't often get covered, but we're covering it here. Now the general up until this point had been Michelle Bachmann, who was against the federal regulations that would lead to more efficient light bulbs. That has to be fought against. There needs to be two sides on this issue, I'm sure. Now, before I move on to the politics of it, first let's just go to the substance of this. So incandescent light bulbs, we're trying to create some regulations that sort of prices them out of the market or leads to some incentives to build the non-incandescent, the LED light bulbs and things of that sort. One reason for this, incandescent light bulbs waste up to around 90% of their energy, not produced into light, just produced into heat and sound, according to the incandescent bulbs that I've had anyway. But Michelle Bachmann's against this, and she's not going to stand for the Democrats and Obama pushing this sort of legislation, even though it was originally enacted under the Bush administration. Who cares? What's the difference? She probably doesn't even know that. I don't know how much credit I should give her, but now she's going to be transitioning out of the House, and so the new general in charge of the anti-LED light bulb brigade is Michael Burgess of Texas. You might remember him from a couple weeks ago when he had the big point about why we shouldn't allow abortion because fetuses sometimes masturbate. That's the level of intellectual firepower we're dealing with in this war. But anyway, they're trying to get rid of this regulation, to stop the Department of Energy from paying any sort of money to enforce the regulations that would lead to it. And we're going to get to the stupidity, but also, like, there are all these startups trying to build these awesome, really efficient LED light bulbs that would love the business that this would generate, the jobs that it would generate in southern states in a lot of cases. We've got ones in Austin, across Texas and stuff like that, but they don't think about this. In Florida even. They don't think about this at all. It's all about making a statement. And the statement is, I'm stupider than you are. And the reason they want to make that statement is they want their stupid voters to feel comfortable. Because if you're a very stupid person in America, the last thing you want is someone like Barack Obama going on stage and debating the issues and showing a firm grasp of the science and, the possible future implications of one policy versus another. That makes the person feel uncomfortable, because why does he know all that? Why does he read all these books? I don't have time to read any books. I'm going to vote for somebody like Michelle Bachmann or Michael Burgess or some other complete moron who's not only stupid, but delights in their own stupidity. I can sort of understand in other issues where we're trying to create more efficient appliances or combat global warming. I understand the opposition in some senses sometimes because of the fears about losing jobs. But their effort is going to kill jobs here. Look, I don't expect Michelle Bachmann to go out and buy an electric car like I did recently. But the idea that we can't fight against incandescent light bulbs, which have been around since like the 1100s, small exaggeration. We can move on to more efficient, better, longer lasting, inevitably cheaper to operate LED light bulbs. But they completely missed that. GE, by the way, said that GM recently refitted a factory, and their energy costs have been cut by about 80%, they say, because of LED light bulbs. Again, way over Michelle Bachmann's head. There's room above her head and the idea for an LED light bulb to fit, actually, ironically enough. But anyway, yeah, I love that my job of making them seem stupid is so easy sometimes because they are so enthusiastically accomplishing that for themselves. Moving on, some science news, I guess. I recently started watching Breaking Bad, and so I'm a little bit more interested in drugs than usual, and so this story caught my eye. Cocaine use over the past few years has plummeted. Why? We're going to explore here and try to find out why. But the interesting fact is that since 2006, cocaine rates have been dropping. They've dropped by 40% just in the last 7 years. That's significant. And we have a few ideas of why that might have happened. First, I'll just get out of the way. We have this U.S.-Colombian partnership that they believe has led to a 44% drop in the capacity for pure cocaine production in Colombia that would then be shipped here. So there's less supply, which both makes it hard to get the drugs, but it also raises the prices of the drugs that do make it here. And so the idea is that that could have made other competing drugs more appealing financially, I suppose. And so that's the credit that I'm going to give to the drug war, I suppose, although it's not the drug war in that we're stopping people at the border, it's that we're working with the home governments to try to stop some of the production, which I think makes a lot more sense. And we're not doing in Afghanistan, by the way, in terms of opium. But some other possible explanations for why this might have happened. Some people are saying that drugs simply go in and out of style. I'm not a big druggie, and I haven't been in the scene for decades, so I haven't experienced this, but maybe some of you can attest to the fact. But Ethan Nadelman's the executive director of the Drug Policy Alliance in New York City. He says it probably has very little to do with successes or failures with interdiction and source control. And he points to back in the 90s when crack became uncool because of movie portrayals and TV portrayals and just the idea that like this isn't a cool thing to do anymore. And perhaps cocaine is experiencing something similar to that. It can be sort of, it seems like something your parents would have done to your grandparents, and that's not cool. And also you have the rise of meth and bath salts and other synthetic things like that. Those might seem more cool until people start eating each other's faces, and so cocaine by comparison seems less cool. But those are some of the explanations for why it might happen, or why it might have happened, the rise in cost and things like that. But we have some interesting other stats that I want to get to. In 2011, there were 1.4 million cocaine users, about 0.5% of the population. I think that's probably lowballing it a bit. Low eight-balling it a bit. Down from 2.4 million, or 1% in 2006. So almost half the cocaine users over that short period, less than a decade. The number who abused or were dependent on cocaine declined from 1.7 million in that same time frame to 0.8 million. So not just people who use it every once in a while, but who are addicted to it. Those also dropped significantly. A 65% drop in the rate of people testing positive for cocaine in the workplace. I mean, I guess maybe some people have very intense, very high-stress jobs, and they need cocaine to get through it. Maybe we should start testing people around the TYT studio. Maybe we'll get to that eventually. But one final stat on arrestees, people who were arrested, that I thought was super interesting. Back in 2000, half of the people arrested for anything in Chicago had cocaine in their systems. Half. And that is down in 2012 to 19%. So still, if you're getting arrested for stuff, you tend to have cocaine in your system. But half back in 2000? I mean, you weren't just drunk, you weren't just on marijuana or something. Like, cocaine was serious business in Chicago back around 2000. And so, I think it's probably a combination of a number of these different things. It becomes more expensive, it's associated with sort of past decades, it seems less cool. But for whatever reason, cocaine's a pretty serious drug, and so while I think that many drugs should be legalized, that doesn't mean that I think people should be using them, or certainly should be dependent on them. I think those are totally separate things. And interesting figures about cocaine. Apparently not as cool as it was about a decade ago. Final story for the day. Ridiculous. The Taliban is active in Pakistan, watching out for the moral fiber, the moral health of the community, and the latest scourge that's preying on the morals of Pakistan, tight pants and other tight clothes. On men, specifically. I don't think you were expecting that little twisty twist at the end. Apparently they already dealt with the problem of women wearing the tight pants and the tight shirts with no bras or whatever, and now they're moving on to the men. Specifically in Waziristan, one of the areas along the border with Afghanistan, it's one of the tribal areas. And so we have a quote, this is from a pamphlet that's being distributed at some of the stores, because they're not just targeting individuals, they're targeting the people selling them. A pamphlet said, "All such clothes which are of a thin material and which do not properly cover men's bodies are un-Islamic and against Pashtun culture." And furthermore, it went on to warn that any shopkeeper found selling such items will be charged a fine of 5,000 rupees, which is roughly equivalent to $50, and will also see his shop closed for at least 5 days. As I said earlier, they've apparently already dealt with the problem with women. Now they're moving on to men. And that's what we should expect. Because when these people become emboldened by the fact that they can crack down on women who are an easier target in these traditional societies, yeah, inevitably they're going to move to the men. And they're going to ban the clothing, and they're going to ban the sorts of headwear that you can wear, and whether or not you can dance, and whether or not you can sing. That's what the Taliban does. That's what fundamentalist religion does. When they gain power, they exercise that power. And it tends to go in irrational directions like how tight your pants are, and whether or not you're showing off your junk, and things like that. And to move this back to the American context, that's why people like me and other people on the left are so worried about the encroaching, creeping, growing power of fundamentalist Christianity. Yeah, they're not banning the tight pants today, but they're trying to gain power. And they have banned some clothing, by the way. I mean, in terms of the banning, there are the laws against sagging pants and things like that. Now, that's not necessarily strictly fundamentalist Christianity, but let's not pretend that we don't enforce dress codes here in America. Even in New York, where women are legally allowed to walk around topless, they get arrested for it. And so we are trying to control how people dress. Furthermore, there is a huge population in America that loves to blame women who are raped, for how they were dressed. Again, mixing morality and clothing. So look, this is just in Waziristan now, but I'm worried about this sort of thing happening in America. I think we need to stop it where it tries to advance in both locations. This is progress against people who are living with a 6th century point of view. We need to win, and not just to protect our pants, but to protect much more vital, much more central rights that they would like to take away. Poor dog. Hilo, come here. It's okay. Hilo, say hi to the nice people. For the first time ever, I have taken Hilo to the studio while I filmed, and he eventually was not having it, and so he started crying. But anyway, he'll be fine. No worries about him. But that is all the stories we have for the show this week. Next week, we are going to be coming back with another weekly roundup, so feel free to leave questions you'd like to have answered on the video, or preferably in Twitter. You can tweet me. It's easier for me to see those later on. They don't get buried by other comments as much, and things like that. Hope you enjoyed the stories, and of course, as always, if there's issues or topics or anything like that that you'd like to see covered on the show, the only way I can know about that is if you let me know. So tweet me about it, leave it in the comments and things like that. If you've made it this far and you're not already a subscriber, feel free to subscribe, and you'll see more stories like this in your inbox in YouTube every single day, both the fun stories and the incredibly important undercovered stories. And we will be back next week with even more of that. See you later.